Good day, learners. This is your accounting teacher, Sir AJ, and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, we will be talking about more about assurance engagements, and we will be talking about the Philippine Framework for assurance engagements. So if you want to learn more about assurance engagements, in which audit is one type of this engagement, this video is for you. So good day again, learners. As what I mentioned kanina, we will be talking about in today's video the Philippine Framework for Assurance Engagements. So this framework defines and describes the elements and objectives of an assurance engagement. In the previous video, I have mentioned to you that the broad classes of engagement that CPAs may perform are assurance and non-assurance. Yung audit, 'di ba, it's under the assurance engagement, under specifically sa attestation. But in this framework, it will be described and defined in more details yung assurance engagement. Also, in this framework, we will identify the engagements to which yung mga standards ay mag-a-apply. But I already mentioned this in the first video that PSAs apply to audit engagements, PSREs apply to review engagements, and PSAE applies to other assurance engagements. All of these things are assurance engagements. The framework is not a standard in itself. So, yung mga standards, yung PSA, PSRE, at saka PSAE, etong framework is parang it sets the basic foundation lang ng mga terms at ng mga definitions, but it is not a standard in itself. It does not provide procedural requirements for the performance of assurance engagements. If you want to know what are the requirements for the performance of an audit or a review or other assurance engagements, then dun tayo sa mga standards. Kasi wala yun dito sa framework. And in addition to this framework and yung mga standards, PSA, PSRE, and PSAE, yung mga practitioners, we call them practitioners, not auditors, because yung assurance engagement, as you all know, it's a broader term. Pag sinabi mo kasing auditors, that only pertain to audits. So, since assurance engagement involve many other services, hindi lang audit, then we call them practitioners. They are also governed by the Code of Ethics, which I already mentioned in the first video, and they are also governed in PSQC. So, governed by PSQC as well. So, regardless kung anong engagement yan, even nga non-assurance, these two standards apply to these engagements. So, we will talk about first the definition and the objective of an assurance engagement. What is an assurance engagement? An assurance engagement is an engagement in which a practitioner expresses a conclusion designed to enhance the degree of confidence of the intended users other than the responsible party about the outcome of the evaluation or measurement of a subject matter against the criteria. So if you take note of this, yung definition ng assurance engagement is parang definition lang ng audit. It's just that yung assurance engagement, more of mas broad yung mga terms na ginagamit. But the thought is the same. In assurance engagement, you will prepare a conclusion that will enhance the degree of confidence ng mga intended users. You enhance the quality of the information. About what? About the evaluation or the outcome of the evaluation of a subject matter against a criteria. So, meron na naman tayong subject matter versus criteria. Kung ano ang outcome nun, yun yung conclusion mo about. Is the subject matter prepared in accordance with the criteria? Or is it not prepared in accordance with the criteria? So, technically, almost the same sila ng definition. It's just that the assurance engagement is more broader in terms of the scope of its definition. So, we have this concept called subject matter information. What is this? Subject matter information is the outcome of the evaluation or measurement of a subject matter that results from applying the criteria to the subject matter. So, pag ine-evaluate mo yung subject matter against a criteria, we call that subject matter information. For example, the recognition, measurement, presentation, and disclosure represented in the FS, yun yung outcome. Yung recognition, measurement, presentation, disclosure result from applying a financial reporting framework, for example, PFRS, that is the criteria, to the financial position, financial performance, and cash flows, which is the subject matter. So take note here that the subject matter information is not the financial statement itself, kasi yun yung subject matter, but kung ano yung mga nakasulat doon na recognition, measurement, presentation, and disclosure, which is the outcome of applying the financial statement as against the PFRS or the criteria. Another example is yung assertion about the effectiveness of internal controls. Sinabi ng management, our internal controls are effective. That is the outcome, which results from applying the cost of framework, which is the criteria, to the internal control of the company, which is the subject matter. So, the outcome of applying the criteria or evaluating the criteria against the subject matter is called the subject matter information. So, we have the types of assurance engagement based on, number one, who performs the evaluation of subject matter against the criteria. Meron tayong dalawang types. The first type is assertion-based. Normally, yung mga audits fall under dito sa assertion-based engagements. Because in assertion-based engagements, the evaluation or measurement of the subject matter is performed by the responsible party. For example, in an audit, yung nag-evaluate or nag-measure ng subject matter against the criteria is the management itself. At yun ay in the form of assertions, which we will discuss in future videos. That is made available to the intended users. Kaya siya assertion-based because the responsible party makes assertions wherein the practitioner will express a conclusion as to these assertions. Kung totoo ba or tama ba yung mga assertions nila. The second type is what we call the direct reporting engagements. In this type, the practitioner either directly performs the evaluation or measurement of the subject matter or obtains a representation from the responsible party that has performed the evaluation or measurement that is not available to the intended user. So, walang assertions na ginawa ang responsible party. But instead, either the practitioner directly performs the evaluation or ginawa yun ng responsible party pero hindi naman siya available to intended users. So, the subject matter information here, dahil directly reported, should be provided in the report of the practitioner or in the assurance report so that alam yon ng mga intended users. We have another type of assurance engagement, but this time, based on the level of assurance. We have what we call the reasonable assurance engagement. Normally, yung mga audits fall under this type, yung reasonable assurance engagement. Objective is a reduction in the risk, assurance engagement risk, to an acceptably low level. So if you take note, yung assurance, mas mataas yung assurance, syempre mas mababa yung risk. So pag sobrang low yung risk mo, then yung assurance mo is mataas, reasonable. In the circumstances of the engagement, as the basis for a positive form of expression of the conclusion. So in a reasonable assurance engagement, because medyo high yung assurance na binibigay mo, dapat the conclusion should be in a positive form. We will explain later kung anong itsura ng positive form ng conclusion. Pero again, audits fall under this type of assurance engagement. The second type is the limited assurance engagement. The objective is a reduction in assurance engagement risk to a level that is acceptable in the circumstances of the engagement, but where that risk is greater than for a reasonable assurance engagement. So, yung assurance dito mas mababa kesa sa reasonable assurance engagement. Normally, yung mga reviews, di ba, audits, reviews, they are all attestation services. Yung mga review fall under this type of assurance engagement kasi limited yung assurance na binibigay nila. Take note, under these two engagements, wala po tayong binibigay na absolute assurance because in audit or in assurance engagements, we cannot reduce the risk to zero. Hindi pwedeng maging zero ang risk. So wala pong such case as absolute assurance. In limited assurance engagement, the form of our conclusion is in the negative form. We will explain later kung ano yung itsura ng negative form ng conclusion. So the next part of our discussion is yung mga elements ng assurance engagement. There are 5 elements of an assurance engagement and ilalagay natin to sa mnemonics na TASA. T, three-party relationship. A, appropriate subject matter. S, suitable criteria. Another S, sufficient appropriate evidence. And last, A, assurance report. So take note that an assurance engagement cannot prosper pag wala itong 5 elements na to. So we will discuss in details yung 5 elements na to. First, for three-party relationship. Sa assurance engagements, this is the only time na pwede ang third party. So in this type of relationship, sa assurance engagement, may 3 parties in that relationship. First is the practitioner. Take note of the use of the term practitioner. It's broader than the term auditor. Because ang auditor, ang pwede niya lang i-perform ay audits or reviews. Pero ang practitioner, more than that. Kasi pwede siyang mag-perform ng other assurance engagements. The second party in the relationship is the responsible party. And the third party is the intended user. So take note that the responsible party normally is the client or the management of the client. And the intended users are yung mga gagamit ng financial statements. Normally, mga investors, creditors, etc. So the second element is appropriate subject matter. Take note of the operative word appropriate. The subject matter should be appropriate. If it's appropriate, it means that it is number 1, identifiable, and it is capable of consistent evaluation or measurement against the criteria, such that the information can be subjected to procedures for gathering sufficient appropriate evidence to support a reasonable assurance or limited assurance as appropriate. Depende kung anong klase ng engagement. The subject matter may be financial performance. It may be non-financial. It may also be physical characteristics. Or it may be a system or a process. And finally, it may be a behavior. As long as the subject matter is appropriate. Element number 3 is suitable criteria. Take note of the operative word suitable. The criteria should not just be any other criteria, but it must be suitable. Now, a criteria are the benchmarks, or standards used to evaluate or measure the subject matter, including where relevant benchmarks for presentation and disclosure. So, ano yung mga characteristics ng isang suitable criteria? Meron tayong mnemonics, RUN CR. R for relevance, it is capable of making a difference in the decision making. Understandability, it is clear, concise, and not subject to different interpretations. And neutral, it is free from bias. C, completeness, walang na-omit, no? There was no omissions. And reliability, it is capable of consistent evaluation. Criteria can either be established, for example, yung PFRS, it is established because an authoritative body already established that criteria. Pero there are also criteria that are specifically developed for engagements. So normally, mas okay sana pag established criteria kasi used by Benny, no? Pero we can also use specifically developed criteria. So that's suitable criteria. The fourth element is sufficient appropriate evidence. Take note that as assurance engagement practitioners, we cannot give conclusion kapag hindi tayo nakapag-gather ng evidence. More importantly, it should be sufficient and appropriate. Sufficiency means the quantity of evidence, yung volume, while appropriateness is the measure of quality of evidence, that is its relevance and reliability. Take note that the quantity of evidence needed is affected by the risk of the subject matter information being materially misstated. So pag mas mataas ang risk na may mali sa subject matter information, then the more evidence is required. And by the quality of such evidence, meaning the higher the quality, the less is required. But finally, sufficiency and appropriateness are interrelated. Pero, merely obtaining more evidence does not compensate poor quality. So, dapat balance ang sufficiency and appropriateness. Who determines what evidence is sufficient and appropriateness? It is determined by the professional judgment of the practitioner. So, depende yun sa judgment ng practitioner. And depending upon your planning methodologies. Pero, ang kailangan nating tandaan is that we will only stop obtaining evidence when we already gathered sufficient appropriate evidence. The last element is assurance report. So the practitioner provides a written report containing a conclusion that conveys the assurance obtained about the subject matter information. So dyan nakasulat ang conclusion. Now, in an assertion-based engagement, take note pag assertion-based, gumawa na ng assertion yung responsible party. So, hindi mo na kailangan isulat sa report yung assertion itself kasi it was already made available to the third party or to the intended users. So, the conclusion can be worded either, in our opinion, the responsible party's assertion that internal control is effective in all material respects based on XYZ criteria is fairly stated. So in this way, you are wording it in terms of the responsible party's assertion. Depende dun sa assertion nila. But you can also word it directly in terms of comparing the subject matter and the criteria. So in our opinion, internal control is effective in all material respects based on XYZ criteria. Normally, what we use, for example, in audit is yung pangalawa. We say that the financial statements are prepared in accordance with PFRS. In a direct reporting, take note in a direct reporting, sino ang gumagawa ng subject matter information or the evaluation of the subject matter? It's the practitioner himself. Therefore, kailangan mong isulat sa conclusion mo yung subject matter information because it was not disclosed to the intended users. So, it should be worded directly in terms of the subject matter and the criteria, just like yung dito sa second. In a reasonable assurance engagement, yung conclusion mo, positive form. In our opinion, internal control is effective. So parang pag sinabi mong maganda siya, ang way mo ng pagkasabi is maganda siya. That is the positive form. But in a limited assurance, it is in the negative form. Ganito yung wording. Based on our work described in this report, nothing has come to our attention that causes us to believe that internal control is not effective. Parang double negative in all material respects based on XYZ criteria. So if you think about it, pag gusto mong sabihin ay maganda siya, pag positive form, sinasabi mo maganda siya. Pero pag negative form, parang ang sasabihin mo ay hindi naman siya pangit. So, if you think about it, yung maganda siya versus hindi naman siya pangit, yung level of assurance mas mataas kapag sinabi mong maganda siya or positive form. So, kaya dun sa hindi siya pangit, medyo limited yung assurance or lower yung level ng assurance. Yun yung negative form. So, the last topic for the framework is about engagement acceptance. Take note that practitioners do not just accept engagements agad-agad. We have to have some certain criteria or standards before we accept engagements. So, before you accept engagement, these are the requirements. Number 1, relevant ethical requirements should be satisfied, such as independence and professional competence. So, requirement yan. Since you are giving an assurance engagement, dapat independent ka and dapat competent ka. That is a requirement. And number 2, the engagement exhibits all the following characteristics. Take note that number 1, the subject matter is appropriate. Number 2, the criteria to be used are suitable. Number 3, the practitioner has access to sufficient appropriate evidence. Number 4, the practitioner's conclusion is to be contained in a written report. And number 5, there is a rational purpose for the engagement. So kung papansinin nyo, parang ipinapakita lang dito na dapat nandyan lahat ng mga elements. Plus, there should be a rational purpose. So pag wala to, do not accept the engagement. Other considerations in terms of accepting engagements. Having accepted an assurance engagement, a practitioner may not change that engagement papuntang non-assurance or from a reasonable assurance to limited assurance without reasonable justification. So, hindi ka lang pwedeng basta-basta mag-change from assurance to non-assurance or from reasonable to limited kapag walang reasonable justification. Ano lang ang mga reasonable justification? Dalawa lang. Change in circumstances or misunderstanding concerning the nature of the engagement. Yan lang po ang mga reasonable justification na pwedeng mag-change ng engagement. Pero pag hindi yan ang mga nangyari, then you cannot change from assurance to non-assurance or from reasonable to limited. If such change is made, the practitioner does not disregard evidence that was obtained prior to the change. Okay, so that would be all for the framework for assurance engagements. Now, it's your time to test your knowledge. If you know the answers to these questions, you may comment your answer down below and I can reply to you if tama yung naging answers mo. Question number 1. Which of the following best describes assurance services? A. Independent professional services that are intended to enhance the credibility of information to meet the needs of an intended user. B. Services designed to express an opinion on the fairness of historical financial statements based on the results of an audit. C. The preparation of financial statements or the collection, classification, and summarization of other financial information. Or D. Services designed for the improvement of operations resulting in better outcomes. And question number 2. A practitioner's assurance report contains the following conclusion. Based on our work described in this report, nothing has come to our attention that causes us to believe that internal control is not effective in all material respects based on ABC criteria. What type of assurance engagement was performed? A. Limited assurance engagement. B. Reasonable assurance engagement. C. Negative assurance engagement, or D, positive assurance engagement. So if you know the answers, comment your answers down below. So thank you very much guys for listening and watching this video tutorial. If you have any questions, you may message me sa aking social media accounts. Please do like, comment, and share this video so that it will reach to our other students and classmates na nahihirapan sa accounting at sa auditing. So, thank you very much guys, and sa lahat ng mga nakakalimot pa, please do subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell para updated ka kung meron akong mga bagong videos na pinopost. So, please do remember that every day is an opportunity for us to learn something new. So, for today, that would be all and I will see you in my next video. Bye!